Okay, so protection of iron and steel. This particular boat is steel, isn't it, rather than iron?
She's steel.
There was a bit of a changeover at about, was it 1918, 1920s
Yeah.
is what we generally think is the time
Yep.
when most boats and most barges were made from iron, started being made of steel. They continued to rivet them, but, predominantly, didn't they?
They did. She was built in 1932, riveted, and they went on riveting up until the end of the war, really,
Yeah.
when arc welding became more widely for
A
this
bit more
sort of vessel.
perfected.
Yeah.
Because I've seen some earlier arc welding where it's almost the shoulders are nearly half-inch thick,
Yeah.
where they've joined them up, so it's pretty obvious when you've got an early one. But
Yeah.
looking around us here, most of the barges that are sitting here are all riveted, and there can be issues with riveting, especially in trying to protect them. And what's really great here is we were talking about painting decks and stuff, and Charles basically the previous owner as well did it. Did
Yeah.
He? Yeah.
And his father, the decks have never been painted. We just put Owatrol on
Yeah.
it every year. I go around, I've got one or two bits of rust beginning to come because I've been amiss this year. But come the spring, I'll go around with the wire brush, chip it off a bit, and then a couple of coats of Owatrol.
Yeah.
And the lovely thing about that is that the corrosion doesn't get in under the paint. No matter how careful you are with paint, you drop something, winch handle on it, makes a tiny chip, water gets in, runs underneath, and you've got a corrosion problem.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's sort of classic little early starters here on the superstructure here, and that's exactly the sort of thing he's
Indeed.
talking about. Once you get that oxidisation in, it's amazing how quickly it will creep underneath the paint coatings. But when we look really closely at this deck, if we get down on hands and knees and look at it, you can actually see how well it's sealed in, especially on the deck here, which is riveted, so it's always notorious. At the edge of the boat, it's amazing to see there's actually no jacking of one away from the other, which is remarkable, really. I've been on boats younger than this where they've always been painted and you've got a bit of jacking going on. I can see a tiny little bit of jacking over there, so we perhaps need to film that so people understand what I'm talking about with jacking. So basically, jacking is where the water has managed to get in and slowly create an expansion and corrosion between the two plates, which will slowly force this apart. It's more noticeable on things like beltings, even on like our narrow boats and modern production boats where they haven't welded both sides of the D-bar, and we'll have a look at that in a minute now. But you know, this is a really good option. I'm really impressed at how well it's kept, and it's not slippery at all. Do you have to wait a little while from once you've applied it?
No longer than it takes a coat of paint to dry.
That's brilliant.
So, and yeah, a couple of hours I can walk on it. It's good stuff. It's good stuff.
It's really impressive. So corrosion is an ongoing thing with any iron or steel boat. The trouble is everything that goes to make iron or steel just wants to go back to Mother Earth, and no matter how hard you try and protect it, it's always trying to go back. And so you've got literally like ongoing things like here on the beltings. These have all been beautifully welded up and protected, but again, one tiny little bit and off it goes and it gets underneath. But you can see here, Charles at the time of refit has had the beltings where the boat has had little impacts, which are not big deals. Some people really worry about indents in steel. Personally, I don't think there's a big problem with it, as long as you understand what's going on and you make sure that the rivets haven't been disturbed. But things like that have been nicely fill welded to protect the steel from actually having any risk of corrosion going on behind it, because that's when it really eats into itself, and it's amazing. Then you've got this double reaction between the plate and the D-bar going on, and it's quite common on a lot of narrow boats where they've been built with just one weld on the top and stitch welded on the bottom. And over here we've got a classic example of what happens if you don't keep on top of it. So you can see this has had quite a substantial deflection here. I'll get that out of the way there just to help. And so you can see, although it's fully welded on the top, it has had a bit of stress, but you don't know what's going on underneath and how the corrosion's starting to get in there. And you can see a little bit of jacking going on over there. You know, so it's really important to keep on top of them. The top bar is beautifully welded up and no problem at all.